Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Bonsai Stuff Podcast. It's me, Scott Martin, Bonsai Matsu, and thank you for your company wherever you are around this beautiful planet of ours. This episode of the Bonsai Stuff Podcast, I want to talk about a few reasons why everybody should have an Australian native in their bonsai collection. I've been doing lots of presentations and talks, and one of the things that I like to ask when I'm presenting on Australian natives is to ask a question of the audience. And that simple question is, can you put your hands up just to show off numbers of who's got Australian natives in their bonsai collection? And when I started doing this a long time ago, I would ask the same question. There'd be a few people around the room that would do it, but now more so than not, it's a vast majority have got Australian natives in their collection, which is fantastic. So I want to go through anyone that's sort of teetering on the fence, or maybe doesn't want to dip their toe in the water. Couple of good reasons why we should. Also, want to talk about what we're doing now, especially in Australia, but also other parts of the world. But what we're doing here in Australia with our bonsai is we're creating history, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into that as well. And I want to talk about a term that got raised recently on a Zoom catch up with a mate called Bonsai Maturity. So I want to dig into that a little bit deeper as well. So it should definitely be an interesting podcast for you. And again, as always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. A few people have been sending me their stats that have been coming out at this time of year for Spotify or your playlists or whatever it is, and top 2% fan, Luke, thanks, mate. Top 1%, Lewis, it's awesome. It's great hearing those stats and hearing and actually for me to see from your perspective how much time you've actually spent listening to me drone on about bonsai, and it got me thinking that I when I record this podcast, I very much have to stop myself from rambling on, because I find that I'm so passionate about bonsai, and hopefully it comes across in the podcast. And I've got such a love for everything bonsai, and that's the people, that's the trees, it's everything from start to finish with bonsai. And this podcast, obviously, it's it means something to people, which is lovely, which is really, really great. So I do appreciate it. Thanks very much, and let's get into it. Okay, so Australian natives as bonsai. This is not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. It's been happening for a very, very long period of time. Just seems to be that now, with the access to information and sharing of information via a couple of really good bonsai clubs and good people online and experience with different species, different varieties of Australian natives, it's making their popularity increase, which is fantastic. And I just wanted to run through, I suppose, because lately I've been doing a bucket load of pruning of my natives. It's a really good time for us as we come into the early part of summer. We've had lots of growth, lots of pushing, lots of vigorous growth. There's flowers on trees. It's just beautiful. So as I was working through them, I thought this is something that should be discussed and talked about and promoted, because they are very rewarding, and there's some really good reasons why. And I want to start with the diversity of species, I suppose, because they're a long time ago, I suppose there was only in my eyes anyway. It was more about only having a few varieties of Australian natives. It was more the hardier ones, the ones that would survive, because I used to hear lots of stories about, you can't keep them, they died, they can't be repotted, or they just love water too much. I can't get enough water into these trees, and luckily now that's all starting to dissipate a little bit, and we're becoming smarter on how we manage them and how we look after them. But the variety of species that you can get that are suitable for pot culture, for bonsai in Australia and possibly around the world, but I know for me locally there's lots of native specific nurseries when you travel around the place, and I just strongly encourage you just to have a crack. And where my strongest advice would be try and start with something that's quite young. There's certain species I know that we shouldn't be collecting Australian natives, in my eyes anyway, because protected. There's lots of rules and regulations that we live with here in Australia on collecting trees, and I'm sure there are ways around it, and that's cool. And I've got some collected trees in my collection as well. So it's not that I'm saying you shouldn't, and it's not a viable option. Definitely a viable option, but hear me out. If you start with a little whip, a little seedling from a nursery, costs a couple of bucks. So the investment's very, very low. And if things go pear shaped, well then you're not out of pocket hundreds, thousands, whatever it's going to be for something that's more mature. So if you start with something young, you can actually get them and put some really nice movement and shape into them. It's like any tree, any bonsai that you start with. You can manipulate and work with a young tree a lot easier than you can once that wood has hardened off. So I find with Australian natives that a lot of work gets done with them when they're really young, and they look great. They look really, really good, and it keeps your options open then if you'd like to keep it as a small tree as opposed to a really large bonsai as well. But working on them when they're really young and getting those seedlings into bonsai culture. How we look after them and how we maintain them and how we make them flourish, and containing those roots into a container of some kind of vessel of some kind, then they seem to react really well to that. Whereas that stepping down from large pots to smaller pots might be something you've got to be a little bit more delicate with, as with any tree. You can't go chopping off all its roots all the time and expect it to kick on and do miraculous things. So I find that if you can start with them really, really young, then you'll have, you'll get some really, really good, interesting movement, and you can put your thumbprint on them from a very young age. But, secondly, the outlay is not, a squillion bucks. So you can maybe get a range of different species at the same time and start them and go, hey, look, I've got, all these different ones. And some may not turn into be the greatest bonsai. Their growth habits might not be particularly suited to being, a magnificent masterpiece in some people's eyes, but they have got their benefits. Another thing I love about them, which I talked about before, was the flowers. Flowers on Australian natives. Oh my God, there's just such diversity in what you can get, and sometimes they're subtle and elegant little flowers that might appear on a on a Melaleuca or something like that, one of the paperbark varieties that we can get that just sort of, you have to search for it, and it might not be something which is dangling in your face like one of the bottle brush, a callistemon with bright red or bright purple or pink coloured flowers on there, which sort of really pop and really accentuate the design of the tree. But there's so many different ones that, for me, I find that having a range of different natives in my collection, when they do flower, whether it's a little coastal tea tree with a beautiful little white flower that opens up with its delicate petals, and then as I talked about before, the when those petals start falling off, it's like the cherry blossom festival in Japan, because they sort of rain down as you walk through them. But there's so much to admire when it comes to the flowers in our Australian native species that you'll never be bored. The new growth is vigorous, it's beautiful in colour as well, and talking about that too is the growth rate that I've found with regard to the Australian natives is second to none for us. If you think about Australian natives, there's so many different varieties, so many different species, so many choices that you've got, and it might not be the ideal scenario for you to grow something which you see every day. But if you can get an Australian native that's local to your area, it's local to your area for a reason, and it obviously loves the climate and it loves the conditions in which it's going to grow around your area. So therefore it makes natural sense that as a bonsai, it'll do better there than if it was taken to a foreign environment. Let's say your area is, it gets more rain, it's a slightly cooler area, it's, maybe more seaside, whatever. Then if that species is taken from there and put into a dry, arid condition where there's very little rain and there's strong, dry winds and it's nowhere near the sea whatsoever, then you just naturally assume you have to create an environment which that tree is going to survive and thrive, or the tree's not going to make it. So I'd think that if you can if you can have it where you're working with local species, and again, like I said, it might not be terribly exciting for you because it's like, I see this tree every single day, but I work with the prickly paperbark, which I love because I've talked about it before. It evokes feelings from me being a little kid because they were used a lot where I grew up as the nature strip trees. And I saw these things. I used to lie underneath them and look up at the foliage and whatever, and get prickled by the little dried up leaves on the ground all the time. And that's sort of, for me, I know that they grow really well where I live and that they're going to thrive and do really well. Plus it evokes that feeling for me, that memory in my head that it makes me smile. So local native species will do exceptionally well. And just be mindful that if you're going to bring something from another area into your collection, that you're going to need to have an environment in which it can thrive, which is very similar. Have to be close to, I suppose, where it's found naturally. Another thing that I love is the appearance of the trunks. Now, natives have such diversity in their trunks. Think about the gums, the eucalypts, what they've got, and think about like I said before, the paper barks. There's just such diversity and interest. We're on a land that's ravaged by fires at times, and the trees have to build up defences to survive that kind of an environment, whether it's used or not. It's part of the makeup of the tree, of the species. And wrapping the core of the tree in, lots and lots of layers of whatever it is, the bark of whatever kind, paper bark or rough textured bark, makes them ideal candidates to get through those bushfires that we incur or over time. So those characteristics of the trees, as they develop, they sort of start to come to the fore as well, and they're just magnificent. Like a lot of stuff we've got here. It's so different to the exotic species that it should be on the same level in your mind, that when you look at another tree like a maple or a pine or a juniper or something like that, they've got a lot of characteristics that we look towards and go, hey, that's the vision I have in my head of bonsai. It's a perfect black pine. It's the king of bonsai. It's the way to go. Well, I think the Australian native should be in your mind to the same level, saying these things have got qualities as good, if not better. I don't mean that to be an insult to anybody, but Australian natives have got certain characteristics which make them, in my mind, at times a step ahead of all those exotic species. Does it mean you should go one way or the other, like go all Australian natives or all exotics? No, not at all. Not at all. I'm saying the two varieties can complement each other, and that in your collection, 100% hand on heart believe that you should have a range of trees, a range of varieties, and throw Australian natives into that mix because, my God, they are so worth it. And keep the exotics as well. I love my trees, my pines. I love them. If you look at anything that I've got on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, you'll see that I absolutely love the pines. I love junipers. I love working with cedars. I love working with all the varieties. But the intention for this little bit of a chat is to maybe broaden a little bit to say you can do both. Like I've got in my collection, a bucket load of natives and a bucket load of exotics, and the watering requirements for them, and this might be controversial to some, and Australian natives do love water. They definitely do, but my natives live side by side with my exotics, so they're in the same mix for me. I don't change my soil mix. I'm very clear on that. My fertilising regime for them might be a little bit different because of a few issues that the Australian natives can have, but vast majority get exactly the same fertiliser as what my exotics do. Timing for things is very different because, like repotting, for instance, the natives wake up and really have their growth push a little bit later than I find the exotics do. But doesn't mean I can't work with that. Doesn't mean I have to, say, well, that's it. I can't be repotted at the same time as everything else, so I'm going to get rid of them. No, they just get done at different times. But the watering, they get watered with the same hose, with the same water at the same time as the rest of them. So you can live with bonsai of all varieties in your yard and not have to make massive changes regardless of what you heard. And their development rate is so fast, their growth rate. If you want if you've got itchy scissors, all right, if you want to get out there and you want to be working continually on your bonsai and you don't have hundreds of bonsai in your collection, then throw a couple of natives in the mix, because I guarantee you they will grow almost 24/7, 365 days a year. They are fantastic. They might slow down a little bit, but they're more like a juniper than they are a deciduous. They just keep pushing and pushing and pushing the growth, and with that growth, if you can manage it rather than just pruning it off, if you select things, this is the leader, this is the branch, I come back to it again. The first thing I talked about this year, the bonsai plan. If you can put a plan in place for your natives based on their growth acceleration that they can have, especially when they're young, oh God, you can achieve a lot of stuff. You really can. There are varieties, obviously. This is a very generalized talk, so I'm not putting all natives into the one basket saying they all grow at 1,000,000 miles an hour. There are exceptions, okay? I admit that. But there's a lot that grow so fast that you can really get your teeth into them and get some real progress at a rapid rate and develop ramification. When you do get to that point where you're happy with your trunk, your primaries, your secondaries, and you want to get into that ramification stage, the natives will do it for you. They will develop so fast that you'll be so pleased with them. Another thing, they're plentiful. There's so many native nurseries around. The popularity in gardens now, it's grown because there is a big push to go native with them for the native animals that we have, and helpful with bringing birds to your yard, which is great. I've got great mates that are not bonsai related at all, and I walk around their backyards now, and I'd say 90+% of the trees in the backyards are all natives, because when I talk to them, it's like, why did you pick that tree? Oh, the flowers on it are magnificent, and you should see the trees. The wattle birds come in and they do this, they do that, and it's like, oh my God, this is so cool, because I love the fact that we're embracing the native species that we've got. They're readily available through nurseries, so you're not having to dig around and hide, find them hidden in dark little corners in bargain bins and stuff like that because they can't be grown, or looked after or whatever. And they're becoming mainstream in so many ways that it makes natural sense to bring them into the bonsai world for us as well. And styling wise, I've talked about styling natives and whatever before, but that's not what this is about. What this is about is that you should explore the gift of Australian natives as bonsai to you as a custodian of those trees, as a bonsai practitioner, because there's so much that you get out of them, and if they are local to your local area, then so much better. If they're not and you want to acquire them, then there definitely can be issues with them acclimatizing long term. I'm not talking like within 6 months. It's like 2, 3, 4 years down the track. You can find that things maybe don't work out quite as well as what you'd hope because they don't grow naturally in those environments. But that's the same for every variety of tree you have as a bonsai. Some do really well in cooler climates. Some do better in more humid climates. You can't take a fig and put it to a snow environment and expect it to be brilliant every year on year, without having some kind of repercussion. So, Australian natives, my advice to you is have a crack. Don't be frightened. If you haven't got them, get into it. Start with something that's not going to break the bank. Look at stuff that's local to your area. Get in there and have a play with it, build up the strength and do the research. There's so much information available online these days, in the public forum, as well as via specialists, native bonsai clubs and stuff like that, which through their membership, they've got access to some amazing information and amazing people that have got so much skill and talent in that area that are happy to pass on that information as well. So, I really strongly encourage everyone, our potters in Australia, but not just in Australia, around the world, are diversifying their range of containers that we can use, and some of those work absolutely magnificently with the Australian natives. But that doesn't mean you can't go down the traditional road as well. Like I like my Australian natives being in traditional, Japanese type bonsai containers because they complement them as well. But that's that's up to us. That's our individualism when it comes to being a bonsai artist, which is part of what we do. but horticulturally they're really suited to us in Australia, as well as around the world. There are people I've heard, listening in Germany that have got Australian natives as well, expats that have moved overseas that have found them in local gardens. And, I was looking at photos on the weekend there, which I'll talk about a little bit later on too, about another section of the podcast. But, seeing Australian natives in Japanese bonsai nurseries, not great, but still developing and starting from scratch somewhere along the way. But nevertheless, Australian natives, they're taking hold of the world, and I strongly recommend that you get into them. Don't be intimidated. Don't be frightened. Look for people that can help you and have a crack. Okay, so we are now early December, and yep, you guessed it, decandling season for me is started. We're off and racing. In fact, as soon as I finish recording this podcast for you lovely ladies and gentlemen, you bonsai fanatics, I will be getting into decandling some of my larger black pines. For me, it's perfect timing. It's up to you based on your local area, where you are, what you do, how you do it, timing, all the rest of it. So, disclaimer for me, it's started for where I'm based. So it's going to be a busy time, an interesting time, and one of my favourite. I talked about decandling last podcast. I'm not going to get into it again this time, but I just walked past my workshop to after getting a nice hot coffee to record this next section of the podcast, and walked past the big black pine that I put in the workshop yesterday, because where I'm based in Melbourne, we've had a pretty wet start to summer, and it's been cool as well. So I grabbed the tree yesterday as it was bucketing down at about 16 degrees and freezing down here, and thought I'm going to let you dry out a little bit, because I don't enjoy decandling when the tree's dripping wet. So I'm looking forward to getting to that. Anyway, so the next section of the podcast I want to talk about is I had a listener in the workshop over the weekend, and Darren, and we were talking about his recent trip to Japan, and he was blown away by everything about Japan, which we all are. I love it. The place, the people, the culture, the bonsai. Omiya Bonsai Village. We're talking about that up there, and the quality of the trees. He went to a couple of shows while he was there. He's just ticked a hell of a lot of bucket list items. But one of the things we got into, which is what I want to talk about in the podcast, is he was talking about the cost of trees over there. In particular, there was one photo that got raised, just a black pine, Japanese black pine, and he couldn't believe that it was only like, I think it was 150, 180 bucks or something like that for this nice sort of starter stock tree. And where I'm based, the price of trees, raw material, seems to be going up higher and higher. The demand's definitely increasing, so therefore, the old economics of supply demand, it's driving prices up, and that's okay, which I don't mind. But what the purpose of the podcast was, looking back at that photo, I said, we've got bucket loads of that stock available in Australia. Like it's a 10, 15-year-old Japanese black pine. So nothing fantastic, nothing spectacular, but we've got bucket loads of it. And it got me to thinking and talking about was where we are right now in Australia, like in our bonsai life, bonsai journey, bonsai, whatever you want to call it, right? We're young, we're only fresh, as far as the world opening up through the means of information availability and education and whatever else. There are a lot of people who have been doing bonsai in Australia for a long time, but it's not at the point where it's we're 1,000 years into growing trees in pots. And that's my point. So there are people that have been doing it, 50, 60 years. There's some great trees, and I'm not meaning any disrespect at all by saying any of this, but in the scheme of the world turning, our bonsai journey is relatively fresh. We're relatively new, and we have strict quarantine laws. We have strict collecting laws, which is great. I'm up for both of those. I'm not trying to change any of that. So we can't go out there and dig up a 500-year-old tree and turn it into a bonsai. I don't want to get into collecting ethics and all that sort of stuff, but we can't do it because everything's protected, in my eyes, correctly. We can't import trees from overseas, so we can't have someone else's 500-year-old tree and then bring that into Australia and say, hey, look at us, and we take that quantum leap forward with what we do, which can happen now. Japan can export its trees to Europe, wherever, right? And again, that's not the purpose of this section of the podcast. What I want to talk about, though, is where we are at in Australian bonsai now overall is we're creating history. All right, so what we're doing, what you listening to this podcast, what you are doing now in some shape or another is creating something which will then go on in future years to someone else and to someone else and to someone else, which is where that's the sense of awe that I get when I go to Japan. I look in a nursery and you look at the trees and, even now, I look at photos of the nursery where I did some training at Achien and someone will put a photo up every now and then, and I'll scour through the trees and try and look for trees that I worked on when I was there, and that's relatively short, but they're still there. Some of the trees are still there, and it's amazing that what we're doing here in Australia is we're making bonsai not necessarily for us, but not necessarily our kids, because it's not it's not the way it works. It's not going to be, hey, I grew this, you have to grow this. It's someone else is going to take over that. So your bonsai family may not necessarily be your kids, people you live with, people you know. It can be someone else that walks in, buys that tree off you, acquires it, whatever, gets given to them, gifted, whatever, and then that goes on. That tree's journey then hopefully continues successfully, where that person then cares for it, goes through their lifetime loving it, giving it everything that it needs, and then someone else comes along and their bonsai family gets bigger. It might move into state, it might whatever, be sold online to someone you don't know, but regardless where we are at in Australia, I believe this right to my very core, is that we are building the foundation of bonsai for future generations, which, I hear, bitching about it. Oh, I can't get trees from overseas. I wish we could get this. Oh, why can't I bring this in? Why can't I do that? It's like, I talked earlier about Australian native whips and taking them from very young, very low cost items and putting your wire on them and shaping them and starting to develop them. That's the part for me that I think that's our job. That's our purpose in bonsai in Australia right now. We've got magnificent bonsai. We're second to none. We've got some of the best trees coming through the system. They just don't have the age on them yet. Now, and I imagine, like, if I look at some of the best bonsai in Australia at the moment, I think, what would that look like in 500 years? And it's like, that's just mind-blowing. It seriously, it boggles my brain to think, what is this? Like, if this tree looks this good after 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is, imagine in 500 years what this tree is going to look like. And we are positioned to be absolute leaders in the world when it comes to bonsai when we get to that maturity stage. We've got the education, we've got the skill, we've got the intent, we've got the techniques, we've got everything that we need here right now. We've got the species, Australian native species. Imagine, honestly, I have to stop myself at times, because I do believe that, you might not think that you're doing much by that little bit of wire that you put on, or how you set that branch, or how you pick the trunk line, or how you put it into a pot, and the angle that you choose, and the apex positioning, and the flow and intent of the design that you're making with that tree. But it does. It's going to make a massive difference, because we're on the precipice of absolute greatness of bonsai in Australia, and it's thanks to us. Everybody listening to this, what we're doing right now is we're the start, we're the foundation, we are the building blocks of this magnificent journey in bonsai, which is going to go on in perpetuity. If the world keeps spinning, then there may be changes along the way, but we're building bonsai now that are going to get passed down the line, and whether they turn around and say, oh, that's a Scott Martin tree, that's a Fred such and such tree, that's a whatever, it makes no difference to me. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is that we do the best we possibly can right here, right now with our trees, to know that when they go to the next phase, someone else puts a few bricks on that wall, builds it up, makes them a bit stronger. Then it goes to the next person, they do a little bit more to it, and then the next person does a little bit more to it. So doing that foundation work, think about taking your little native seedling that you've wired it, suddenly gets to repotting time, you take it out, you start working on the nabari, and you set that nabari for life. Like you do work on that thing now and have the thought in the back of your head that I'm doing this because in 1,000 years' time, this thing is going to look absolutely incredible. That's the part that makes the hair stand up on my arms and makes me really proud of where our industry is. Our culture, our bonsai culture for everybody is that we get a hell of a lot of satisfaction out of along the way. The journey's what it's all about. That enjoyment of every little step along the way is great, but we are the foundation. We are the base of which Australian bonsai is going to grow, and that's incredible. I love it. It's future of Australian bonsai. We are rock solid. Whew, I had to have a little break after that one. I got myself so excited talking about Australian bonsai. Anyway, so the next concept, I was doing a Zoom catch up with another fantastic lad, Corey, up northern New South Wales, and we were having chat about things, and particularly his bonsai journey and where his trees are at and what's happened, and there was a moment where we were talking about the way things used to be. And I think this applies to absolutely everyone. This is so normal for all of us. And I think if you're honest with yourself, that you'll look back and go, yeah, you know what, I did do that. And it's the fact that you'd walk through a nursery or you'd see a tree and you'd go, yep, that's a bonsai. I'm going to make that thing into a bonsai. And you'd buy this tree in a pot. It might be at a general nursery, not even a bonsai nursery at that stage. And you've read a couple of books, you've seen designs that you like, and suddenly you buy this thing, going that's going to be it. That's going to be exactly it. The foliage might not be right, it might not be suited for bonsai, but you look at it and go, yep, that's what that's going to be. You get home, you grab your wire, you may as well throw the tree rather than wrapping it onto the tree, because there's no real skill with it. You chuck it on there and you start tearing off branches, you're making shari lines, you're tearing bark off the trunk, you're doing all sorts of dangerous stuff to it. You're flexing this tree, you're bending branches, you'll sit back and look at it and go, yep, that's perfect. How good's that? Like, seriously, that only took me 20 minutes. What's so hard about bonsai? Like, what's all this fuss about? It's only, it's not that hard to make them. But then, time goes by, a week later, branches start turning brown, they start changing colour. Next thing you know, the tree sort of stalls. It might die, it might not, but it's hanging on for life by a thread. There's nothing really happening to it, and you suddenly go, well, what's gone wrong? Oh, maybe it's my watering, maybe it's the feeding, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Anyway, then you suddenly go out, you'll do it again, you'll do it over and over and over, and at that stage, your purpose is, or your intent is on self-satisfaction. Right, you're doing these things because it makes you feel good, because you're an artist, right? Yeah, you can make a bonsai. It's, I've got these visions, I've got these things in my head that I want to do, and you jump into it. You start tearing into trees, and it's really hard to control yourself. I get it. I've been there. It's me. That was me a long, long time ago, and I still have images in my head as I talk about this of trees that I worked on, thinking I should never have done it. I never should have even bought that tree in the first place. The foliage was nowhere near designed to be, a juniper foliage. It's a ground cover of some kind. Anyway, and it sometimes takes a while to learn that what you're doing is wrong and it's your fault. It's on you, right? And now we've got this availability where you can reach out to people like me and other people around the globe, where you can sort of say, hey, look, this, and someone will give you not necessarily a rap on the knuckles, but it'll just be a good, hard, honest chat to say, hey, listen, this is what needs to happen. You need to draw a breath, and this is why, and this is the stages we go through, and suddenly through the education process, you suddenly become enlightened and go, right, okay, and and from talking with my buddy, we were looking at it, and and the pennies drop now because it's been a period of time, and the focus suddenly changes from you to the tree, right? Not to the bonsai, but to the tree, to that living being that you've got in your care, custody, and control, the thing that you are responsible for 24 hours a day. And when that switch gets flicked, that you start thinking about the care and well-being of that tree, your mindset changes, right? You still have that desire, you still have that passion, you still have that burning ambition that you want to be a bonsai artist, that you want to make that into an amazing tree. But the timing for things and the application of those technique changes. The rush gets taken off, right? And I call it bonsai maturity, because that's when it might be a short-term thing. It might take a couple of weeks, might take a couple of years, might never happen. To some people, it doesn't. I see some stuff, some terrible, horrible stuff where people keep flogging these trees over and over and over. It's like, God, you just don't learn. But it's one of those things that I think to be a good custodian, to truly love trees, to truly love bonsai and enjoy and get the most out of what we do, that maturity point has to kick in sooner or later, where you suddenly slow things down and go, right, okay, what's the right time to do this? And how long should I wait? And what trigger points do there need to be on this tree to show me that it's ready to go, that I can take the next step? And what's, going back to episode 1 of 2023, what's the plan? What's the plan for this tree, and sticking to that bloody plan, making sure that you're not jumping ahead too far because you're keen to get to the end result. I just talked about, that we're the base, we're the foundation for thousands of years of bonsai in Australia, and they'll always look back to this period of time and go, the founders, they started with nothing, and look at what they've built, look at what they've made. So there shouldn't be a rush for us to design or finish our bonsai, because we've got forever. Right? These trees are going to outlast us well and truly. And if you just get, let's say it's a 10-part plan for this tree's development, whatever they are, and you get to 0.6, rather than getting to the 10th point in the plan, well, that's great. Well done. You've enjoyed it. You've really achieved massive things by getting along there. And that bonsai maturity is something that, in your own mind, you've got to work out, has that kicked in? And the catalyst for it is when you start looking at that tree going, what do you need? Not what do I need? What am I going to get out of you? You're not a tool for me. You're not a piece of clay where I can make a pot and put in a kiln and say, yep, look what I've done. You're a living being that I've got responsibility for. How do I nurture you? How do I get you to be the best bonsai available in the whole wide world? How do I take you to that point? All right, do I need to improve my wiring skills? Do I need to improve my repotting skills? All right, so you can do all this stuff independently into yourself, and that tree then gets on the path, on the plan. You develop it nicely, you do the right thing at the right time. That's bonsai maturity. And I think that if you look at the best bonsai practitioners around the world, they've all got that. They've all got that patience. I talked about patience in earlier podcasts, but it's that maturity level where you can flick it off. And maturity doesn't come from age. Like, don't get me wrong, you can be 12 years old starting bonsai and be far more bonsai mature than someone who's in their 40s who's tearing trees to shreds 3 days a week. It's not an age thing. It's purely when your mindset changes to be, what do I have to do to this tree to make it magnificent? And what do you need? You tell me. Like, I'm here to look after you. I'll do the best I possibly can. Let's work together on this, and let's make you bloody magnificent and the best you possibly can be. And anyway, so when you stop thinking about yourself and start thinking about the tree, that's bonsai maturity. All right, let's wrap this baby up and put a bow on it and put it under the Christmas tree. The 2024 intensive program has been getting a hell of a lot of work lately. I've been doing a lot of work on it, and with next year being a particularly busy year for me, darting around the country, I'm locking in some dates early. So I'm very hopeful that hopefully by the end of this year, I'll have availability of dates because I've been getting a few inquiries about future intensives for those that live a little bit further away from my base that are very interested. So, yep, just letting you know in a public forum that they are coming and they're going to roll out relatively soon. So keep an eye out for that on the social. So if you're interested, sign up on the website. It'll be coming out via an email format. Anyway, so thank you for sticking around. I do appreciate it. Subscribers, buddy, love you. I could, buddy, give you all a big scream and cuddle right now and say thank you because you're the lifeblood of this podcast. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing and you've done for me and the support that you show me because it means a hell of a lot. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I love it. I'm still fired up and you know I cannot wait to go out and get into my decandling. But you know I think understanding that we're on the starting blocks for something that's magnificent here in Australia with our bonsai, and that you know throwing into that mix that we've got availability of so many beautiful exotic species that the rest of the world has, as well as our Australian natives that grow so well in our climate. We're very lucky, very very lucky, and we should make the most of it. We should be not closing one door to open another. I believe thoroughly that we can have both doors open. We can have natives, we can have exotics, and you know, if you're sort of all down one path and not the other, then you know maybe just have a think about it because there's definitely benefits to both, and it's you know it makes us well rounded, you know, and it makes our bonsai here a lot stronger than if we just went down one path. So I think bonsai for me in particular is about enjoyment. And oh my goodness, do I get enjoyment out of Australian natives as well as those non-native species that I think that I am solid enough in what I do with my bonsai that I can have both. So please explore, please enjoy, and make sure that you get that experience with natives that are local to your area because they will do exceptionally well. And if they do exceptionally well, you'll be very very happy. I can reassure you. So. We're getting closer to Christmas. There's only a few more episodes left for this year, which are coming thick and fast, which is great. This is episode 43 for the year. God, I can't believe it. It's amazing that we've done it. I'm loving the format. I'm loving the feedback. So please stay in touch. Scott@bonsaimatsu.com if you need to email me or via the socials. As always, keep it coming thick and fast because I'm more than happy to help, and I mean that honestly. That's not something that I say with hollow content. I do mean it with hand on heart that one of the great joys that I get is knowing that in some shape or another I've helped you or someone become the best they can at bonsai, and that you can enjoy it as much as I do. I doubt you'll enjoy it as much as I do because I freaking love it. But if you can enjoy it half as much as what I do, then yeah, the world's a very happy place. So. Enjoy the time with your trees. Keep an eye out for pests and stuff like that too. Fungal issues at the moment, especially down south in Australia with the wet that we've had. I've noticed a few powdery mildew issues cropping up. Keep on top of it and make sure that you are spending daily content with your trees because they love you for it and you love them. So until next time, happy bonsai.